The cost of training a personal agent will always be in proportion to the degree of custom behavior we expect. It behooves us to tread cautiously with the agents we use most often, because these are the agents whose performance for us most differs from generic responses. Anyone can use your elevator, but only your phone knows the best weekend route to your office when the Red Sox are at home. Whether computational agents could ever be considered people is debatable, but to assert that they might be treated as creatures seems less preposterous, even to those who doubt the very possibility of actual artificial intelligence. The literature on the way we should treat agents is already large, but it pales beside the literature on the way we ought to treat animals. This topic, of course, inspires vast disagreement. A Jane monk and an artisanal butcher may find much to discuss, and many of their neighbors will regard each of them as wrong-headed. But a broad consensus does exist on some points. Machines are made for use. An antique engine, painted and polished for museum display, is nice, but less beautiful than an engine performing the work for which it was meant. Our sympathy should not become mere anthropomorphic fantasy. Machines are happy to do things that people hate. Teenage goddesses don't really enjoy fetching cocktails for their aunts and uncles, but Hephaestus's autonomous tripods don't mind. They have nothing better to do. Web agents need not be constructed to serve us or to serve only us. They may indeed be contrived by villains eager to lead us to our doom, or unleashed by fools who didn't quite know what they were doing. Exploring villainous use of the web is particularly important in this the age of Trump. Villains might use our agents against us. Imagine, for example, a system that searches the Twitter stream in search of young women, analyzing their discourse for hints of a sudden new love. A list of such accounts might be of interest, for example, to organizations that seek to prevent women from obtaining birth control or from having abortions. Predatory lenders could scan for people facing a sudden financial reverse or a serious illness, or whose social media schedule has changed suddenly. In fact, our tweet bots can pre-qualify the best marks, saving valuable expert conmen for the most profitable targets. Or you could look for people of faith. We could call this Twitter bot the Serpent, and find ways to offer them assurance and a sense of community. Later, having awaited a moment of irritation or dismay or doubt, the Serpent could turn on its followers and seek to sow strife and dismay. We have reason to believe that this has already been employed in Russia's efforts to undermine the United States and the EU. Elsewhere, I have discussed some ways in which our treatment of our slaves of steel might stray in the direction of immorality. In the theater, Ophelia drowns nightly and twice on Sunday, but it's not our fault. If Hamlet is on the holodeck, it is precisely our fault. She drowns for us. Can Ophelia consent to marry? If so, is not her consent clearly coerced? Since if she fails to amuse us, she may be returned to the shelf, and so to oblivion. Leaving our concern for Ophelia aside, let us instead consider the moral hazards that confront the human interactor, Hamlet, and by extension the author or director of this holodeck entertainment. The flirtation with Ophelia reenacts the infamous rape in cyberspace. Indeed, it is worse. The victim in the online mud was free to log off, but Ophelia cannot. Even if she could, would her opting out of the game world not be a form of self-slaughter? Today, we assume that computers ought to be friendly and compliant. We assume that user-friendliness is the peak of happiness. In Mozart's opera, Don Giovanni's servant Leporello is always complaining and always obstructive. He is often irritating and always inefficient. He is always on watch for his master's reputation and salvation, even when Don Giovanni seems not to care. User-friendliness and compliance is an incunabular delusion. Slaves of steel may best serve us, at times, by arguing with us. Instead of placidly telling us how to get where we want to go, our guide might instead tell us why we ought to go somewhere else. Let's think for a moment on the computational agent that helps us listen to music. Let us think for a moment about a computational agent that helps us listen to music. This agent watches what we choose from our music library and also tracks other features of the environment. Are we at home or in our car? Is it morning or midnight? In fact, let's go further. Might not a computational agent become adept at composing music we would enjoy? We need not ask whether it composes great music or even interesting music. Might it not compose reasonable background music for our workouts or our breakfast? The agent has access to your choices in music. It can analyze every note. It has no need to sleep. It has nothing else to do. It knows a lot about you and a lot about music. My friends might scoff at its music, but that doesn't matter. It only cares what I think. Indeed, the utility of this agent increases in proportion to the scorn of my friends. If my preferences match everyone else's, I could be happy simply listening to whatever everyone else chooses. But if my tastes are esoteric, I may need to work harder to find music to enjoy. The composing agent could be a wonderful thing for me, though you might not care for it. Now, suppose a villain were to destroy this agent. My music library still exists, but all those years of observation and analysis are gone. There will be no new breakfast music. I might understandably be quite cross with the perpetrator. A jury might award me damages for the loss of the services of my composer. Still, this is a civil matter, a question of injury and reparation between the villain and myself. It's not a crime. Yet suppose this agent, instead of inventing little musical entertainments, were making amusing puzzles about novel enzymes for a retired biochemist. This is a harmless intellectual entertainment, one he might share with his friends. It's harmless, that is, until a hypothetical enzyme invented for fun actually turns out to be effective for binding to a difficult viral protein. Again, a nefarious villain erases the agent. We cannot hope to reconstruct the agent, since our aged professor cannot resume his decades in the laboratory. A retired professor is understandably upset, but so are all who now contract viruses for which suitable proteins have not yet been invented. The civil loss to the professor is modest. He has been deprived of his pleasant puzzles. The loss to society, however, is real. This villainy is a crime. To burn the last copy of a book is villainous. It deprives the world of its last chance to argue with the thought of its author. To destroy a computational agent deprives us of our chance to converse with the non-human mind. I've spent some time discussing how we can treat computational agents badly, and why that is often bad for us. Let me conclude by suggesting that our computational agents treat us too well, not for their own interests, but for our own good. User-friendliness and bland acquiescence do little to improve us or to cultivate the better angels of our nature. Our cars tell us the most efficient way to get to our friend's holiday party. Perhaps the car ought to divert us to a lovely little bookstore in the neighboring village. When we object that the diversion would make us late, the car might perhaps remind us of priorities or discuss our failure to read much this month. It might point out that having read so little, we were becoming a bore, and so the party would do little good. Our pocket computers play music to our whim. Perhaps they should more freely express the opinion that we are spending altogether too much time with Taylor Swift. We need not, of course, abide by the machine's every suggestion. We might understand the situation better than the machine, and we certainly might think we possess a clearer understanding of ourselves. Yet that understanding is necessarily partial. Sometimes a second, inhuman opinion is just what we want. These notes are part of a longer work in progress about the reasons we study computers, and I've discussed that with lots of my friends and colleagues. I'd like to thank them all. Of course, all the thoughts are mine. Thank you for your time. I'm Mark Bernstein.